Okay, we are live.
Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, depending where you are in the world. I'm Barbara Peters from the Poison Pen in Scottsdale, Arizona, and it's my pleasure to be introducing you mystery readers to Emily Sullivan, who is actually a romance writer who has apparently gone over to the dark side. But Emily, so I believe, has actually won did you win a Rita Award for what did
A
she do?
golden heart.
A
Yeah,
Golden Heart Award.
yeah.
Okay, I know there are numerous. And anyway, you've written historical mystery and with an interest in late Victorian. So, what prompted you to suddenly decide to? And this is the start of a mystery series. What
Yes.
interested in you in switching over to crime?
I enjoyed reading historical mystery, and it was always, once I sort of got into writing and publishing books, it became kind of a goal, I guess, to write a mystery. And I just thought about it for a long time and just kind of throwing around ideas in the back of my head, especially while I was working on other books. And then eventually I came up with the idea for a death on Corfu, and it seemed like all the pieces seemed to come together and it felt really compelling. So I decided to give it a shot and see what happened.
But I really enjoyed it. It is, in fact, our May Historical Fiction Book of the Month, and Emily has very kindly signed copies for us. They published yesterday, so congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And they are somewhere between Emily and the Poison Pen at the moment. But anyway, they'll be here shortly with this very colorful cover. Now, I was saying to Emily, all of I know about Corfu, I've been to Greece, I've been to Greek islands
Mhm.
and so forth. But all I know about Corfu was from watching the Durrells on PBS, which I thought was a wonderfully well done series. I remember reading the Alexandria Quartet ages ago, which Lawrence wrote. And so, it did take you over parts of the island, not, I mean, the Durrell's home itself, it took you into whatever adjacent city or whatever it all was. And in fact, it didn't look that different to me than other Greek islands that I have been to. So anyway, it was a place where many of the British um, spent time,
Yes.
partly to escape the British climate.
Yeah.
Egypt was a hugely popular destination, especially in Victorian times. It's where
Yeah.
actually the travel industry, as we know it, kind of really began in Egypt
Mhm.
when Thomas Cook decided that
Yes.
take advantage of. I know it was he created a kind the modern travel industry with
Yeah.
hotels and tours and all. And I was so sad some years ago. I think it was before the pandemic, but maybe in the pandemic, when his company went bankrupt.
Oh wow. Oh,
Did you know that?
I didn't know that. I've read about the company. I think I wanted to set a book in Egypt once a long time ago, and I did all this research and I found out all about Thomas Cook and that it was still active, which seemed amazing to me, but that's too bad it didn't.
Yeah, I thought so too. Maybe the whole thing about conducted tours. I mean, because that was
Hmm.
part of the deal. Maybe like river cruise ships and all the rest of it
Hmm.
kind of replaced all that. But anyway, if you lived in Britain, and in the 19th and 20th century, or at least the first half of the 20th century, you did enjoy the opportunity to spend some of the winter somewhere warmer.
Yeah.
And so Corfu would have been one of those places. So tell us why Minnie Harper is called a Minnie Harper mystery, meaning that's the name of this series, apparently. What brings Minnie to Corfu?
Minnie married her husband, and they left England because he got a job working at the British Embassy in Athens, and he decides to leave his job and retire early rather suddenly. And so he moves her and their two very young children to Corfu because it's considered a nice place to live. There's a lot of British people living there. They don't really want to go back to England. And when the book opens, it's been 4 years since her husband's death, and she's still on Corfu, still trying to make life work on the island for her and her children.
Well, another
Um,
aspect that I should have brought up, sorry, I was turning off my phone because it's so embarrassing when it actually rings while you're talking to people. Another aspect of living on Corfu would be that it was a lot less expensive as a rule
Yes.
than living in England. Certainly was part of the
Mhm,
drills, and when she was left a widow and had to
mhm.
find a place to live. So um, her husband kind of inexplicably retired and moved the family there. And then when he died, they're more or less stranded, aren't they?
Mhm. Yeah.
And where are they living on Corfu?
I said that they're living outside of Corfu town, which is sort of the main hub of activity on the island. So they're kind of on the outskirts, is sort of how I envisioned it, in like a little neighborhood of their own with other expats.
Right, and up the hill is a
Yes.
larger, um, really nice property. Well, there is a community of expats there, right? So it's
Yes. Yeah.
not just Minnie and her two children, but there are quite a few other.
Hmm.
Um, are they all British? I'm trying to remember. Is it a mix?
I mean, in the book, that's mostly who she interacts with. I don't think that's like necessarily the case on actual
No, I
Corfu,
was referring to
even
the book,
during that
obviously.
time.
Sure, I mean, we're
Yeah.
talking the book world here and not the real
Yes, in the
world.
book world.
And I thought I remembered that most of the people she meets anyway are British or native.
Or Greek. Yeah.
Um, what's the name of the people living on Corfu? What did you just say?
Oh, I just said or Greek. I think they're Corfiots. I didn't forget how they refer.
I know there's Cypriots if you were
There's
on.
Cypriots and there's Cretans if you're from Crete, and then I think they have their own.
Ah, I should look that up. Well, anyway, so there's a lot of action that occurs. I mean, she's kind of struggling along, raising her
Mhm.
kids, and no particular plans for the future. And then this larger house up the hill. What happens there?
The scandalous mystery author moves in to finish his latest book. He's having bad writer's block.
Right. And he's what? He's kind of a recluse, because he's a writer.
Yeah. Yeah, he's kind of grumpy. He's not super happy to be there. He's there because he needed to escape London and he needs focus. He needs to be able to focus to finish his latest detective novel.
So we could say that he was a relatively famous mystery writer. So he's trying
Yes.
to escape what Horse of Ham? I mean, did they have like fandom? I mean, in book world, obviously, but did they have like fandom back then?
I think so. I mean, he's more trying to escape. He's gone through this divorce. He's recently been divorced, and it was a big item of gossip in all the newspapers. So he's kind of more getting away from that aspect. And I think there was like definitely, I don't know, like a level, but I'm sure there was some sort of press, for writers and authors and
Okay,
all
so
that kind of stuff.
he's come to the island. He's an object of attention, even
Yes.
for the community. He's certainly well known, and he's holed up there. And then what happens? I mean, there has to be a way for our heroine, Minnie, to actually run into the reclusive mystery writer.
There's a little neighborhood gathering, a welcome party, and she's invited and goes at her daughter's encouragement. And they get off on the wrong foot, her and the mystery writer. And then to her surprise, the next day he comes to her house and asks if she'll type up his manuscript for him because he can only write by hand and he needs help and he offers her a lot of money to do it. So she doesn't really like him, but she needs the money and it's something she could easily do. So she sort of feels compelled to accept his offer.
So you're actually honoring that time time-tested romance, enemies to friends kind
Yes.
of right, sort of like Pride and Prejudice, but whatever. So where did Minnie learn to type? I mean, that was actually one of the few things that respectable women could do way back
Yeah.
then. With that and working outside the home without cleaning or whatever,
Right.
basic office. It's like Harriet Vane if we think about Lord Peter Wimsey, there was
Yeah.
wasn't, I'm not sure it was Harriet, but anyway, Lord Peter was familiar with and actually I think helped support or drew people from a women's typing school in
Hmm.
London. So where did Minnie, I keep wanting to call her Emily, that's you. Where did Minnie learn to type? Mhm.
Minnie went to Girton, which was the women's college at Cambridge. So she's an educated woman. She hasn't really done anything, work wise, aside from typing and doing little bits of secretarial work for people on the island. But that's sort of her background and where she kind of learned some of this stuff, like typing papers up for her lectures and that sort of thing. And Mr. Dorian is aware of that. That's the writer. So that's partly why he goes to her
Right.
to ask her to help him.
So you made her, which is unusual then, somebody who had studied at Girton College and therefore was, oh, I see thumbing in here looking for something, Mr. Darcy's letter to Elizabeth, so I wasn't
Yeah.
terribly off there. Right. So did she meet her husband there? I mean, why would she have gone to Girton if she didn't have some sort of life plan? I mean, what was she at Girton for? And did it get
Yeah.
derailed by the fact that she got married or what happened?
She's from a wealthy family, and that to her was like, well, I don't want to just go and right. Her idea is I don't want to just be married off. I don't want to have a season. She's a blue stocking, so she's like this educated, I don't want to say like kind of nerdy woman, but that was like her impetus for going. And then while she's finishing up school, her older brother introduces her to her husband, and to her surprise, he takes an interest in her, and they write to each other for a while, and then he ends up proposing and asks if she wants to move to Athens with him, and she accepts because that sounds like a really great adventure, and she falls in love with him. And so I don't think she wasn't like planning to be like a school teacher or something, but it was just something else, something she was interested in. Didn't really want to go to her mother's finishing school or anything like that. So that was kind of my thought process with making her an educated woman of that time,
I
which
think,
yes was
yeah,
was
I
rare.
mean, for the story to work, she has to be an educated woman.
Yeah.
So how did her family react? A, to going to Girton, and B, to her suddenly moving off to Athens with a new husband.
So Girton was a struggle, and her parents were not supportive, so that kind of drove a wedge between them, and that's something she's still kind of carrying with her because she hasn't gone back to England at all since she left, and they're not estranged or anything, but they only communicate through letters. But she has this sort of resentment towards them because she felt like they didn't really support her. She has an aunt who was kind of much more supportive of her desire to go to college, to go to Girton. And then I think
Wait, who paid for her to go to Girton? It was these folks.
I think the family eventually came around, but it was a struggle.
Okay.
It wasn't something that they weren't on board initially, let's say.
All right.
Um, and I think that her parents are so shocked that this man wants to marry her and that he's from a good family. And they sort of didn't expect that from her. They were assuming she'd be like a spinster or something, that they're like, all right, well, great. I guess you're going to go to Athens. But I do think that and it's explored more in the next book. There's like still some tension and some unresolved feelings, for her leaving and just never really coming back, even after her husband has died.
So her parents have not yet met their grandchildren.
No,
Okay.
no.
And so anyway, there she is on Corfu with no particular life plan and these two children to bring up. And suddenly Mr. Dorian comes down the hill after the party and asks her if she can help him out by typing. So she agrees and proceeds up the hill to her job. So what happens after that? This book, it's an interesting book. It starts out on a very kind of stately pace, and then it really picks up as you get towards the end. There's a lot more action that develops. So, I enjoyed just kind of wandering along here in the opening part of the book, and I wondered what in the world was going to happen. And And then suddenly it does. Right.
Yeah.
So did you, you know, romance has a slower pace as a general rule than a
Mhm.
crime novel. And maybe that's one of the things I liked about the book is that, there's so much pressure right now on people writing, the sort of Gillian Flynn twisty thing or the thrillers, or there's some very hard-edged crime going on.
Mhm.
That it was really nice. I think it fits the time that you're writing about, that, things develop at a more leisurely pace. People aren't rushing around. They're not on phones. They're not
Right.
dashing here and there. And I thought that really suited the story.
Good. Yeah. I did want to like take time to kind of set the scene and show what her life is like and the community she's living on. And kind of make things look not nice and like idyllic kind of before you get into the murder mystery aspect of it. Um, it is a little, yeah, a leisurely, relaxing, trip to a Greek island until the murder strikes. So,
I mean, this is what year are we in? 19 what?
1898.
Oh, we're in 1898. All right, so we are
Yeah,
still back in the Edwardian era. So
yeah.
he would have been working what, for the Foreign Office?
The husband?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So he was posted for the Foreign Office in Athens
Yeah.
when he died, right?
Mhm.
So,
Well, he's retired from that position.
all right. Well, he retired, and then when they moved to Corfu, and
Yeah.
then he died. So, did that provide, some kind of pension or some kind of small level of support for her and the children?
She has some money, but it's not a lot, and the house needs work, and it's getting steady. I think it's just steadily lower every year. So she does feel some kind of economic strife when the book opens.
Sure. And her daughter, who is maturing, um, like her mother, doesn't want to just, settle. So
Right.
she's interested in probably going to school abroad. And that again was a very British expat tradition, was wherever you were stationed in the world, because the British were stationed all over the world for one reason or another, they usually sent their children back to England to, to be educated, often at a younger age than Minnie's daughter. But anyway,
Mm.
Minnie concede that she is going to have to think more seriously about
Yeah.
income and about, how to provide for her children, especially her daughter. There's one each, right? A girl and a boy?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so when Mr. Dory and Stephen, actually, let's call him Stephen, when Stephen comes down the hill and offers her this job, um, she is eager to make some extra money.
Mhm.
So she takes it. So what does she discover when she goes up and works at the house? See, I was waiting for her to go up there and fall over her body on day one, but it
Oh.
doesn't work that way.
No, he's working on his novel. She's typing it out, and she kind of can't help herself without making some suggestions to him, and he doesn't like that because he did not ask her to do that. So there's some strife. There's some awkward moments between them where she's kind of overstepping, and he's very sensitive about this book in particular because it's been so hard for him to write. So they argue at one point, and then that's what leads to her leaving the house, running down the hill, and finding a dead body.
She does. Ah, a body.
Yes.
So the body is that of a young maid. Is the maid someone who worked, who did the maid work for? She was a local girl, right?
She's a local. Yeah, she's a maid of another neighborhood British woman, a local British woman. So it's somebody that Minnie has met before and interacted with before she finds her dead.
Right. So then Minnie not only is typing, but she starts, as often is true in mysteries, starts investigating,
Yes.
or starts at least being curious about what
Yeah.
might happen to the girl.
Hmm.
And I think unfortunately we can't talk about all this, but I do think that the reasoning behind it was really interesting. I think to understand it, these expat communities maintained a kind of class structure, just like they did
Mhm.
at home, and it wasn't necessarily the same kind of um, class structure as in England. Sometimes it was based on other stuff. It might have been seniority serving in a post. It
Mhm.
might have been economic, more money than other people. Sometimes, of course, it would have been if they had some kind of upper class background or something. But as I read, so much set in Victorian and early 20th century British outposts and so forth, it was always um, a fairly tight-knit community. They didn't really welcome the local people into it. Um,
Yeah.
and they often didn't try to learn the language of wherever they were,
Right.
and so forth. So there was like a pecking order. And I think it
Mhm.
was harder on the women because the men generally would have been working wherever they were, whether they were,
Right.
tea planters or with the Foreign Office or,
Mhm.
representing some other business and all. The men were working and they had some kind of fluidity. They also interacted more with the local people, but the women didn't really have a lot to do. So they tended to, you know, there's a real parallel, I think, in modern suburban mysteries, where you've got like
Yeah.
a neighborhood or an HOA or,
Right.
some kind of a, group organized around whatever, whether it's, like a sewing club
Mhm.
or influencers or something. There's like a pecking order that seems to
Yeah.
develop naturally. So it's just different today, and that I've read several that really you know, it's like the influencer community. If one of them is far more successful or whatever, has a more beautifully curated life than another. And so that's going to be true on the island, even in Corfu, it's going to be.
Mhm.
But Minnie doesn't really buy into that a whole lot, right? She's not really
No.
interested in being part of that tea party giving,
Mhm.
very insular community.
Yeah. No, she doesn't. And she's sort of she's an outsider. I think she's also shy, and then because she's lost her husband, she's kind of just turned inward a lot
Yeah.
more since
Yeah, I
his
think
death.
if she weren't a widow, if her husband were,
Yeah.
then it would have been a lot more fluid. Also,
Yeah.
they came there after he left his job, so
Yeah.
he wasn't working there and he had
Right.
those connections. So I mean, I don't know what more we can talk about the story without starting to give away a whole lot. Maybe we already have given away some of it.
Right.
I did think that it was a lovely place to set a mystery, but I have asked Emily, is the continuation, since this is clearly set up as a series, going to stay in Corfu, or is she considering moving Minnie around?
Yes. I mean, I don't think we're done with Corfu entirely, but at least for the next book, and it's, if you read the book, I think it makes sense that it will move for the next entry in the series.
Right.
But I like the idea of moving around and having different settings. I think it's fun.
Right. Well, I mean, I do think there's some lovely series, or that's true. Erica Ruth Newbar's series.
Yes.
Um, Part of the idea is to find a new location. Tasha Alexander has written
Yes.
a large string of mysteries, and part of the charm there is to keep going to different. Part of the charm for Tasha writing them, she's a good friend. Is because she then gets to go to those
Right.
places and spend time looking at them or
Right.
investigating them and all. But there's a that whole Jessica Fletcher syndrome. If you have a person in a charming small community and they are always in it, in book after
Right.
book somebody dies, it's
Right.
really, it's called the Jessica Fletcher syndrome, or the Cabot Cove syndrome, whatever it is.
Right.
So I think your idea of moving her. And this was a time of a lot of travel anyway. I mean, we
Yeah.
are well ahead. We're what, 16 years ahead of the First World War, which is going to disrupt everything.
Hmm.
And so the British traveled a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. And they had the infrastructure, with the train system, and it was easier, I think, to travel farther than people think
Yeah.
when you think about that time. So, and I find that really interesting to write about and to read about. So yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to seeing where we can go with it.
Well, as you say, there is, there are river ships, there are,
Yeah.
ocean going ships, there are
Hmm.
trains, there are, we're too early for the automobile to be serious, but
Yeah.
there was certainly plenty of land transportation. And actually, it isn't, none of the distances are that great.
Right.
From Britain,
Yeah.
you can move all around Europe and over to Greece and so forth, and
Hmm.
it's not enormous distances.
Right.
So I mean, after all, they went around the world. I mean, they girdled the globe, but
Right.
I think the British still, at least up until maybe recent times and COVID and so forth, you could run into them anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. So are you still writing romance?
I am. I have my next romance comes out in September.
Ah,
And then I have another historical romance up that I have to write. And then after that, I don't know. But that's what I have right now. So we'll see what the future holds.
are you committed to writing a sequel to this?
I am, yes. I've already written it.
Oh, you've
It's
already
due
written
it's
it.
due
Oh,
tomorrow.
okay. Well, that's
So
good
I've
news.
already written that. Um, there should be 3 books at least. So
Well, yeah. I mean, if the publisher is advertising it as a
yeah,
start of a series, it can
yes.
scarcely be just like one book,
Yeah,
right?
that wouldn't be great.
No, I do think it's why shouldn't writers move back and forth? I hate the fact that genres are so heavily defined right now. Um,
Mm,
and a lot of that is just due to online book selling where they have to tag things in order to make all the algorithms work and so forth. And so I'm finding, people tend to stay in their lane much more
hmm.
than when it was just fiction. And now,
Right,
it has to be particular kinds of fiction,
right.
and there are restrictions in readers' minds sometimes about what they will and won't read. Um,
Hmm.
so we try to ignore those at the bookstore where we can. I like it. So I mean, I think I've read plenty of romance that had mystery elements in it, and they were
Yes.
more heavily tilted towards romance than they were towards crime. But so I think you can also write mystery that's tilted towards romance. And that old
Yeah.
enemies to friends trope is always a very effective one. What are some of the other romance structures? Since you've written a lot of it, it can't always be enemies to
It
friends.
can't. It can't always be that. I mean, there's friends to lovers, childhood friends, estranged childhood friends to lovers, second chance romance. Those are some of the ones I've written about. Marriage of convenience is a really popular one. Um, marriage in trouble or marriage in crisis.
Yeah.
um,
So what do you write? If you're writing late Victorian romance, is there a favorite kind of structure that you find comfortable?
I don't know. I do my first series. All of the heroes were spies, and they were working in the British government in different respects. So that was I liked doing that and like integrating those kind of like not thriller, like maybe suspense elements into the romance.
Spy,
I
the
thought that was
spy, the spy thing itself is kind of a genre within
yes,
mystery, you know.
yes, yeah.
And it's
And sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say it's usually thought of as, kind of glamorous and
Yes.
full of deceit and
Hmm.
deception. It's I think I love spy stories. I mean, we host a lot of authors who write them here at the bookstore, and one of the reasons I like them is there's usually a lot of historical background in it.
Yeah.
A spy story doesn't just start with a body.
Right.
There's and yeah, and it's full of shifting alliances and
Hmm.
fake facade. Well, a facade, I guess, by nature is fake, but anyway, yeah, and also oftentimes, especially with guys like Lacari and so forth, they're real character probes. Why
Yeah.
is it that somebody would be
Right.
willing to spy? Why would somebody be willing to betray his sort of his group? We could say
Hmm.
his country, but it could be a corporation, it could be a bunch of different things. Why
Yeah.
why would people do that? Why would they take that risk? Is it that they love the whole sort of cloak and dagger thing? Is it like role playing? Do they just need the money? Are they working off a grudge? Have they been indoctrinated with some kind of ideology? I mean, there
Right.
are so many. Are they coerced? Um, there's a lot you can do with spies.
Yes. Yeah, that was, I mean, they're romance novels, but that was sort of one of the like the elements in it. Was like the spying and the impact of spying, and right how somebody gets into spying, and what does that mean when they're like falling in love with somebody. Um, so I did find that interesting. And then my last historical romance, Duchess material, there's a mystery that they're solving. So it's still focused on the romance, and it's not a murder mystery. It's a missing student mystery because the woman is a school teacher. So I think doing those books and having those elements like in the background kind of made me, more interested in actually, I don't know, I like combining things. I like having a mystery and a romance or, having those elements. I think they just work really well together. Um,
Back in the golden age, so to speak, it wasn't always a murder mystery. You could write, the Eustace Diamonds by Trollope, for example, which is one of the elements or one of the um, books in his the Pallisers series. It's about a stolen diamond necklace. So, you can have you've already mentioned spy stories. That's part of it, but you can also have heist novels. You can have,
mhm.
jewel robberies. You can have blackmail. You can have a whole lot of things. So today it seems like if it's a mystery, it has to involve a murder. But Dorothy
Yeah,
Sayers wrote one of her really great short stories. It wasn't I'm trying to remember what the hinge of the plot was, but anyway, there were not necessarily bodies
yeah,
so, maybe your opportunity, if you're writing romance with a mystery element or mystery with a heavy romance element, is that you can avoid the body. Were
the
you
body.
were you determined from the beginning that there had to be a murder in the book, or could you have written it without a murder but some other crime?
For this book,
Mhm.
I this book I knew there would be a murder. But then when I started planning the second book, there wasn't a murder, and I was told I had to have a body.
See, that's what I think. I think that is murder, a mystery has become
It's
synonymous
become
with
murder, yeah.
murder. But I myself think that you can have some really good mystery without actually having to kill somebody, as long as it's a crime, as long as it's
Right.
something for which people, or if caught, are going to pay a penalty or they do serious damage and all the rest. It can certainly be called a mystery. But I did, because let's face it, that the idea that many will move on through life and keep running across bodies is really not all that
I
realistic.
know.
So there's a suspension of disbelief that you have to bring to reading them. And I don't know, maybe you have to have the same, I don't know if you have to have that same suspension of disbelief reading a romance. After all, it's a normal human thing to,
Hmm.
form attachments one
Hmm.
way or another. So it probably isn't that artificial. Interesting thought. I'm being philosophical here.
Yeah.
I can see. Right. So this is Jane Austen's 250th anniversary of her,
Yes.
So are you sensing that there's a lot of interest again in the sort of Austen romance. I mean, there are people exploring Jane Austen, but there are people writing Jane Austen has become a sleuth. And if not
Yes.
Jane, her sister Cassandra, who I think should be damned forever for burning all the Jane's papers.
Burning the letters. Yeah.
I have a grudge against Cassandra.
I know.
And now we have one on Monday. Natalie Jenner, the Canadian author, has written a book in which Jane's surviving older brother, I think it's Francis, but
Oh.
she had two that were in the Navy and became
Mhm.
admirals. He is, I haven't read it yet, but he's part of the plot in some way. And so we're
Oh.
actually by then in 1860 because he lived
Oh.
much longer than Jane did. So I'm, there's a lot of Austen adjacent stuff going on.
Yes.
And other people, other versions of her books, they're sort of reimagined.
Mhm.
There comes one of the puppies. I tried to keep them out, but they
Oh.
ignore that. So are you an Austen reader yourself?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I read all those novels, when I was younger, and definitely, watched all the Pride and Prejudice different things.
Right.
And my Duchess material there's some like Darcy, Elizabeth, nods or like winks to the books. I love Jane Austen. I can't, she's been a big influence. Oh.
Sorry, I can't keep her out. So this is
No.
Sybil. Yep, with her
Oh,
little white chin. Yep,
so
she's
cute.
not really a reader, but she likes to be part of the action, right, Peppy? And here comes her brother, who is perfectly white. Yep. Right. So animals. That reminds me that's another thing. Do you feel like um introducing pets of some kind, or you know favorite horse or whatever it all is, into the stories adds a certain depth to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think when it makes sense, for the story or whatever you're doing, yeah, it's fun, and it shows, like a different side to the characters. And um, I like doing it where it makes, where it works for the story. And I think for this book, it made a lot of sense to have them have these, this menagerie of animals. And that was definitely influenced too by the Durrells.
Yeah, I'll
So,
say, yeah, because
yeah.
the middle son was the one who actually became quite a famous, what was it, zoologist? I mean, he
Yeah.
became a zoo. Could he have been a
Zoologist?
zoologist as opposed to a zoologist? Why am I having
I
trouble
don't
with
know.
language here today? But anyway, so if you're writing mystery, you will remember that one of the first rules of writing crime is the dog never dies,
Yes.
or the cat, probably.
Yeah, no animal
No
deaths.
animal is harmed in the writing of this book, right?
No, no, absolutely not. I wouldn't want to write that. I don't want to read it, and I don't want to write it.
Well, we recently had a crime writer to the store who didn't go along with that rule, and
Oh,
I had a hard time in discussing the whole book um without touching on it. But I also will be interested to see, it's a recent book, how people react to that.
oh yeah.
See what happened. There was a reason for doing it that way, but
Yeah,
I
still.
think it's a high risk thing to do.
Yeah, I wouldn't do
Yeah.
that.
So who do you yourself like to read besides Jane Austen? Are there people in the either community that you particularly recommend? And it's okay if
uh,
they're all dead, because otherwise you
okay.
have to, hurt your friends.
I mean, I just finished Jerry Thomas's latest Lady Sherlock book,
Okay.
A Ruse of Shadow. So I love that series. I also love her historical romances, which she's not writing right now. I started reading her historical romances when I started getting into that genre, and then I got into the Lady Sherlock series too. Um, I like Ashley Weaver and her Electra McDonald
I do too.
series.
Her final book in
Yes.
she's going to be doing a Zoom event with us in June, and
Yeah, I'm excited for that book.
I have it right over there in an advanced reading copy form. So I have to pace myself,
Yeah.
my reward for working my way through each month is going to be to read something I really want to read from the fourth,
Yes.
for the next month. It's kind of a set of delayed gratification to
Right.
keep me on track. I do too. I think she's done a really, and there, one of the reasons you probably like it is the spy stuff.
Yeah, I enjoy that element.
Yeah.
I think it's well done and it's a cool idea. Yeah, I really enjoy those books.
Anything else?
I know I'm blanking. I have a arc to read of Martha Waters, and she's writing And Then There Was the One, which is like a golden age. It's a romance, but it's like set in a golden age mystery world, like a
Yeah.
small English village. And I really like her historical romances that are very Austen-esque, Regency rom-coms. But she wrote this golden age mystery slash romance that I have a copy of that I'm going to start that next now that I finished uh, Sherry Thomas's latest book.
Well, you'll like that. We have a book coming out in June, and she's coming to see us by Karen Dukas, Dukess. And I'm trying
Okay.
to remember the title. Patrick can tell. It's just something like Murder Weekend. But
Yeah.
anyway, it's an American from Buffalo
Yeah.
who winds up in a small English village on um, a staged mystery weekend. The village is trying to
Oh.
raise money. But it's partly a romance and I think Welcome to Murder Week. I knew Patrick
Welcome
would
to
use
Murder Week. Oh,
that
I
from
will check
it.
that out.
Yeah, but you'd really like it. It combines quite a few elements. I really thought it was charming. I sort of like that idea, of the outsider in the English village,
Yeah.
because it gives you a bit of a different perspective. But she has a lovely time kind of walking or touching upon other mystery writers because
Yeah.
in staging a murder weekend and the local scenery, but there's a love story. Anyway, I think you'd really like it. So
Well,
it's
I will
due out
definitely
next
check
month.
that out.
I can recommend it. Great.
Yeah.
So Patrick, since you were using the chat function, you're obviously listening. So you want to pop in and see if there are any questions or comments from the audience?
Sure. Let's see. Um, there's a question. Emily, what is your favorite manner of murdering in the fictional way, of course?
My favorite manner of murdering.
Poison of poison?
Poison.
It's so
Poison.
genteel, right?
Poison's less. I don't know. Anybody can poison somebody. I guess if you're doing something more physical, it's a little trickier.
Okay. People are talking about animals. Um,
I assume that they're all agreeing that no animal should be harmed in the writing of this book.
yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And there's some mention of the book that you were talking about, Barbara.
Yes.
Let's
Not
see.
naming it. This is not a shame moment here.
Someone says, a facade is by nature fake? Question mark.
I don't know. I
In the
mean,
sense that you're using it, I think, yes, of course, but
yeah.
not the building sense. Let's see. Yeah, someone comments that Lori R. King says that she needs to write a different book every so often before she starts hurting characters in her main series. Um,
Is that Lori? Are you watching this program, Lori?
no, it's not Lori.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Um, you've just answered this one. What genre books do you prefer to read? Um, what else here? Okay, here's one. Um, what is the first book that you remember making a big impact on you in your reading?
Oh my God. I mean, it would have to be some kind of children's book. I mean, I remember reading like Beverly Cleary books, like Dear Mr. Henshaw, and that's a book about a writer. And that was probably like one of the books where I started to think like, oh, that's like something you can do for like a job, and that's like a career you could have. Like all the sort of Victorian children's literature books, like Secret Garden and Peter Pan, like those had a big impact on me, and it probably like were like a gateway to like my Anglophile tendencies for sure. But like I don't remember when I didn't want to write and didn't want to be a writer. That's just something that it's been a long time that I've wanted to do that for sure.
I think the path to being a writer is first to be a reader.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
That's about it, guys, for questions.
All right. Oh,
Or well, there's one more. How many books do you plan for this new series?
Well, right now it's 3, and we'll see if it gets expanded to more. But that's what I have on deck. I'm trying to plan for that.
this publisher tends to do that. They tend to start a series, and it makes no sense to have a one book
Right.
contract or one book series if for them anyway. I mean, there are, depending on excuse me, sometimes thrillers or something turn out to be a single book contract, but generally, if you're going to put the effort into designing a series, there needs to be at least 2, but 3 is
Yeah.
more common. I don't know why, I mean, I've talked about this with other authors. We were trying to work out all the terminology. 3 is kind of normal. Then you can
Yeah.
have is it a quartet or a tetralogy? Is it, a quintet, or I'm trying to remember what we worked out. And 3 is the most obvious. It's always the
Mhm.
most obvious number. Just like at the bookstore when we give out tickets. Have you ever noticed that, Patrick? The most common number? If
Oh
we
yeah,
if we have a crowd of roughly 20 or higher, what's the most common number that the author who's doing the raffle picks
17.
every time? I have no idea
Huh.
why. Yeah, I know. It's really
Huh.
fascinating. You would think it was like 13 or something.
Yeah.
No, it's 17. And in a smaller group, it's most often 7.
Oh, really? I don't
So,
remember that.
I think that because of the structure of drama and all the rest of it, that we tend to default to trilogies more of the
Yeah.
time, whether it's science fiction or whether it's mystery or whatever it might happen to be. But does romance actually run in things like trilogies for
Well,
for one pair of lovers? I mean, you can
no, you sometimes, I mean, for traditionally published stuff, it's usually one book per,
right.
per couple. And then you might, like, I've written trilogies. So, like, you might see cameos from different couples, or if it's a family,
Right.
you
I
know,
mean, I know you could have like the Dukes, there could be, or
yeah, or they're all
interesting
friends.
or something. Yeah, but generally it seems to me that in a romance, the story of the one courting couple is over. It's the whole point of
Right.
romance
Yeah.
is that you get them to,
Right. You
wherever
really need to
there's,
finish up in that one book. People
yeah,
get upset if there's a cliffhanger or something.
yeah, I
And
know.
they have to be together at the end, I'm assuming.
Yes, yes. That is like the home, like you have to have a happily ever after for it to be a
Or,
romance.
or the
Yeah.
stormy ever after, but there has to be like an ever
Yeah.
after
Yes.
kind of a thing. And so I think very often it becomes a family saga or
Yeah.
some kind of cultural saga, The Spy Who Loved Me times 3 or something along
Right.
those
Yeah.
lines. Yeah. Whereas mystery, each book also has to be complete, but those people can live on to do something else. Although years ago, maybe you remember this too, Patrick, there was much more of a push on series, and now it's really mostly the other way, isn't it? That people really, well, at least it's equally the other way. That
Mhm.
people like writing standalone books because you can do so much damage to everybody in it. Here comes the guy that should know. We should ask John. He should have actually been running this program. Right. Okay, well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I really loved your book. As I
Oh,
said,
thank
it is
you.
our May mystery of the or historical fiction of the month, and I'm looking forward. You will see when you get to the end of this why I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens next. So it's comforting to know that she's already written it, right? Well, so thank you very much for joining.